Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another of the Teaching Academy's PD series for 2026-60. This morning's session is on collaborative engagement tools, and we periodically run this session where we have a look and a bit of a refresh at our supported in-house tools that we have available for staff and student collaboration. I'll unpack that notion of supported and what it means and why we talk about some tools and not others a bit more as we get into the session. But I am joined today by Alex Barnes-Keegan from DIT and Michelle Mitchell from the School of Nursing, Paramedicine and Health Science. Hope I've got that right. And we are going to be having a look at three types of collaboration tools, collaborative engagement tools rather, today. So whilst I have a Padlet board to run on, I will be spending most of the time in those systems. So this is more of a dance card for me to keep me on track. But I'll provide a little bit of context first before we start looking at any of the particular tools. Normal rules apply, which is basically that there are none. Go wild in the chat if you're inclined to do so. Raise your hand, turn your mic on, whatever it is if you've got questions, and we will engage with those in due course. So let's go with the board. Start our Padlet slideshow. All right, so why are we talking about this today? Questions around peer-to-peer engagement have been going on, well, certainly as long as I've been at the uni, and I feel like probably for decades before that. But when it forms a part of things like Quilt survey data and also our subject evaluation surveys, etc., this question keeps coming up, and particularly in online delivery, how do we ramp up engagement in these spaces, both between staff and students and also student to student, etc. So we look for tools that help us do that, strategies that we can use, and we get questions around whether that means it has to be live engagement or whether there are tools which allow us to do it both synchronously and asynchronously. The three tools that we'll be looking at today basically allow us to do both, which is why we're looking at them. They're one of the reasons. There's also questions really around the idea that there are things that individuals can engage in with themselves, but they also have the opportunity to weigh in on others. So much like a discussion forum, etc. There are probably decisions, design decisions, etc., around how we want that engagement to happen, if we want it to be closely controlled or if we want to leave it sort of open in that space. And these tools also give us an opportunity to move aside in terms of modality from our more traditional ways of presenting things like learning materials and turn them into learning and teaching activities, interactive, if you will. So we'll sort of consider that notion as well. I get asked this every time I run this workshop. Why aren't we talking about Miro? Why aren't we running workshops around Miro? And the simple answer is, although Miro, we have a license for Miro at the university for staff and technically for students, it is not a readily, easily kind of available tool that we can just assume that they can all get their hands on it and start using it straight out of the box. It requires a level of hand-holding and account provisioning just to make sure that all of your students will be able to get in there and use it. Now, you might be a huge advocate for the use of Miro. You may hate it passionately, I don't know, but it's not one that we generally talk about in the learning and teaching space. By and large, it's sort of seen more as a productivity enhancing tool that gets used more in staff to staff, and certainly when it comes down to initiatives like project management and productivity and other things, it seems to have more value in that space than when we're talking about students and teachers together. So I'm not touching on Miro today. That's some other reasons in there, but there's certainly the ability for you to get access to it and start using it, and probably training materials, etc. around. Alex, correct me if I'm wrong there, or maybe drop something in the chat if you're aware of it, but you can get more information about using Miro at CSU if you're interested for yourselves. All right, a little background on Padlet before we get into the interface. What is it? Originally, when Padlet was released, it was referred to as a multimodal bulletin board. Bulletin boards have been going for decades. Essentially, they're a collaborative space where people could make contributions. Once upon a time, they were text only. Now we have this idea of multimodality, which means lots of different types of media and ways to engage in that space. It allows you to create content. It allows you to do things like present that content, just like I am here. And it really allows you to handle things like either communications or the creation of learning artifacts in a whole range of different formats and outputs. Probably one of the most appealing aspects of Padlet is its ease of access, ease of use, learning curve. Yeah, so that accessibility question, it's probably one of the easiest tools I've come across, which literally requires someone potentially going to a page, clicking on a button and starting engaging in that space. It is very, very easy, which is especially useful not just for staff, but for students. It also allows participants in that space by default to engage anonymously. Now, there's probably questions around whether that's what you're after or not what you're after, but by default, it means that students have a safe space where they can contribute to things without necessarily having to reveal who they are. And I'm sure you can probably think of scenarios where that's a good or a bad thing, but that's its default position. So I have a couple of exemplars that I'd like for us to have a look at, and I'm going to hand over to Michelle in just a minute to I guess tell us a little bit about how she uses Padlet in some of her subjects. But let me show you a couple of fairly common scenarios for the use of Padlet. So first one, we have an introductions board where people literally make a post by hitting the big button that says post down in the corner, and they add a contribution. And you can see in this case, it's allowed them to add an image, for example, and then following whatever prompt or stimulus there is, take a moment to tell us about yourself and remember to put your name in the title. Okay, they've done that and they've provided that information. Following on from that, you can see that peers have then had the ability to also engage in that space with comments, etc. underneath. Pretty straightforward stuff. And this is far and away the most common use case for Padlet boards as a starting point for academics in subjects where they want the students to essentially meet each other in a way that might move beyond just a discussion board post, which can be a little dry. So that's one scenario, introductions. Another format that's often used now for introductions, if we have a look in this ACE subject, students also have access to a different type or format of Padlet board, which is called the map format. So this is also a Padlet board where the output this time allows people to, following the instructions here, pick a pin. So when you start putting a post onto the board, it says put in a place. I'm at this place. And at that point, you can then provide the rest of the information as requested by the information, the prompt there. So that might mean adding an image. It might mean putting in text comments. It might be about changing the color of your post in the board, etc. Pretty straightforward stuff. Just changing it from straight out text to also having a map so that people can look around and say, oh, there's someone else that's also here, and seeing who they are. One thing to look out for if you are using the map format, the satellite location tracking GPS-y sort of stuff that's built into this board is decent, which means that if you turn around and said, oh, I live on this street in this place, at that point you're starting to get satellite imagery, being able to zoom in and show your backyard, etc. So telling students not to put in your actual street numbers, things like that is probably important in this space. Otherwise, it'll take you right in, and that can be probably a little too intrusive. Something to keep in mind with the map tool. You'll note also that we're looking at an embedded Padlet board within our content in Brightspace. So that question about accessibility gets taken up another level when we're easily able to embed Padlet boards within our learning materials, as opposed to simply getting the student to open the full board in a separate browser tab. It can be located or situated directly within the content easily. So there's a couple of scenarios for Padlet boards. I think at that point, I'm actually going to stop sharing and ask Michelle to weigh in on how she uses Padlet, because I know she has a number of different use cases. So Michelle, are you happy to tell us a little bit about your use of Padlet?
Yeah, sure. Lachlan, would you like me to share, or do you want to share my site? I've now opened up the Padlet so they can be viewable if you went in, or do you want me to share my screen?
How about you share it?
Yeah,
I feel like you know more about what you're talking about than what I do.
yeah, okay. I'm just going to share my screen here. So, yes, I have used Padlet quite a lot within the two subjects that I convene. So I started at Charles Sturt at the beginning of last year, and I found the Padlet to be really easy to use and just a new way of presenting information. So as Lachlan has described, I've used it for introductions and also throughout the modules, just ways to engage with the students, because the cohort of students that I'm teaching, it's all distance education, all online, but looking at those opportunities to engage and connect. So one of the things that I really do try to do when I do ask questions about particular topics is I'll respond. And often I respond with a question to develop further insight. And for another student to perhaps respond to that question. It does take me going in and looking at those responses, and I realize that students don't always get an email to say that someone has responded to their post. So that's just one way that I have used it. But this particular way that I'm going to talk about today is this assessment task. So it's within complexities in midwifery, and one of our assessment tasks is a mock conference, and we use the Padlet boards of a way for students to present their presentations. So students are invited to participate in this mock conference, and I try to build that anticipation throughout the session. So I introduce the concept of it and what it's going to be about at an intensive school. So when we're face to face, have this poster about what it is, and then students are asked to enroll in two topics. So there's two potential topics that they can enroll in, so they get to choose which one they want to go into. And so obviously the two topics that I choose, and the question is all around meeting the learning outcomes, but it's also relevant to student practice. And there's usually some sort of contentious issue within the topic that they are asked to explore. So they enroll in those two topics in the groups in Brightspace, and then from there they get paired with a student. So you'll see here I've put, there's the two topics here. So for in the 30 session there was birth trauma, and the other topic was post-dates induction of labour. If we go across the tab here, then students are then linked in with another student that they then provide that peer-to-peer feedback with. So part A of this assessment task, they have to submit an abstract in Brightspace as they normally would, and they also have to put a presentation on the Padlet board, as you can see here. So we set it up like it's conference week. They submit their assessment task and their presentation, and then over that week, they've got specific due dates where they have to provide feedback. So with the student they've been paired with, they get to watch their presentation, give feedback, and ask a question. And then the student who did that initial presentation will then have to respond to that question. So I guess it enhances that peer-to-peer interaction and feedback. And it's just a new way or a different way of doing an assessment task. So you can see across here that students submitted their conferences here. The strength of this assessment task, I think, and using this way is, yeah, it meets the learning outcomes. It's relevant to clinical practice. They get that opportunity for peer-to-peer engagement and feedback and developing that critical thinking. And it also allows students, perhaps if they don't have a strength in writing a 2,000-word essay. This is a different way of doing an assessment task. So it allows students with different strengths to utilize those in a new way or a different way. So I find that students that perhaps don't do particularly well in a written task, they might really do well in the presentation aspect of their task. So I like that presents that opportunity for students. It's just that preparation too for the future workforce, that these students will be registered midwives. Part of being a registered midwife is presenting antenatal classes to a group, getting asked questions and having to really unpack the evidence around different things. And also knowing that these are the future leaders and policymakers and researchers too. So it's an opportunity for them to engage in like a mock conference as well. Some of the challenges that came up with this task, and initially, so this task was designed by another lecturer, Jane Lawrence, and she has presented this at a national conference. But some of the things, and I think this assessment task keeps getting refined, but one of the things that came up was students were posting randomly on the Padlet board, and it was really hard as a marker to go in and find where is this assessment task that I need to mark, because you've been allocated a certain number. It was also difficult for the students to find where's the student's presentation that I need to watch and provide feedback on. So this is where I set it up in columns. So students are paired with another student, but they're also given a conference number. So they know exactly where they need to post their presentation on the Padlet board. Another thing that came up was students being unfamiliar with Padlet. So within this particular unit, I also go into, so in resources, and there was a practice Padlet. So this was an opportunity for students, maybe they've never used Padlet before, so they get a chance to practice uploading a PowerPoint, how to make a comment without actually doing it on the assessment board. And I talk about all of that within their preparation for this assessment task as well. Another thing that I was really aware of was the cohort of students. Some of the students within this subject are mature age, and they're perhaps not as savvy with using technology. So just being aware that I give that clear guidance of how to make a narrated PowerPoint or a video or whatever it is that the students choose to use. So just some really clear instructions and guidance on how to do those things to ease any of those concerns with technology. Another thing that came up as this assessment task has continued and developed, we had that secure framework around the use of AI. And that just really got me thinking about the security of using Padlet when we've got students putting their names and student numbers in. It just really got me thinking about, is this okay for us to use this in this way? So after some conversations with Lachlan and different people within the school, we put some measures in place to, I guess, enhance that like security around the Padlet. So one of the things that I do in the settings is just make sure that the Padlet can't be downloaded by anyone else. I've also created a password that I put in Brightspace. So it's only people that have the password can actually open the Padlet. And then the other thing that I leave open to the students is they don't necessarily have to have their cameras on if they put a video up or a presentation. They don't need to include their name if they don't want to. They can just have their student number and their conference number, because in Brightspace, I can see what number aligns with what student. So that's just a couple of things that have come up along the way. And I feel like marking into it has been a lot easier in terms of finding the presentations. And the feedback that I get from students is this was actually an enjoyable assessment task because it wasn't just sitting down and writing a paper. I got to present something. Some of them get really creative with making videos, and other students just do a PowerPoint and present the information in a way that still can, do really well and meet all the subject learning outcomes. So yeah, that's that's how I've been using it.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Now I'm picking on Michelle a little bit today because I don't know that I've actually come across someone that uses Padlet as prolifically as Michelle does. So she's a real passionate user of it, and we've only just touched the surface. So I'm going to continue that exploration for just a minute to show you just how far Padlet is being used in those midwifery subjects. So we will look talking about it in terms of assessment, but allow me to continue here. I'm looking at the midwifery subject at the moment, even from our staff view, in terms of the learning materials and the structure that the academic is putting into each of the topics. They have a reflection board that is built into every topic within the subject, essentially. So apart from your use of other types of interactives and things, I'm sure some of the staff in here will recognize these. They also then build a Padlet board in to facilitate reflection directly within each of the topics that happen in there. And you can see that the students are posting anonymously in there, sharing different types of artifacts, etc., that contribute to that discussion. Sometimes it's the academic, sometimes it's the students weighing in that space. But that obviously then becomes a part of the ongoing learning materials provisioned within the subject. So you've got that whole value add question beyond the one use. And that is in every one of those topics. So there's a whole lot of that happening. I also happen to know that Michelle has used Padlet and a feature of Padlet that not many people use called the sandbox, which is, I'll show you a little bit more of that in a minute about how that actually can be created yourselves. But if I see if I've got a link to it here. There is one. I have an example here. This might look familiar, Michelle. So I think this was probably when you were doing the Foundations of Learning and Teaching subject. You put this together. So Padlet Sandbox effectively allows you to create a collaborative engagement space, which is effectively a canvas where you can create a variety of different types of content, some of them interactive, and you can see that there's media in here, there's documents, PDFs, etc., that are built in. It can be put together almost in a storybook format, so you can work through multiple canvases, slides, however you want to refer to this. And the tool allows you to create the level of interactivity that you want in that space for the audience. So it might be a passive experience where they just read through and use it like an ebook effectively. Or if you wanted to ramp up that interactivity, you can create sort of spaces within that that allow other people to contribute into that sandbox as well. So it's a form of whiteboarding in a sense that we'll get into, but most people are building Padlet boards with an idea in their mind about how they want that engagement to happen, the format, the structure, the parameters, and so they want some level of structure in there. Once you get into this space of making sandboxes, that's kind of almost going out the window. You're starting with, you can do anything in this space, and the level of engagement really has to be quite closely defined if you want it to follow a particular track. Anyway, I think it's high time that we actually got into Padlet and had a look at how to use the format. So Michelle, I'll stop putting you on the spot here, and we'll have a look at the Padlet tool itself. So how do we access Padlet? We go to padlet.com. If you don't have an account already, let's move that over here. It will ask you at this login screen. But the way that you get access to a Padlet account if you've never used it before is you need to log a Sherwell ticket through DIT. And I have the prompt options for the ticket on that board for today as well. But essentially you're going into Brightspace, then Padlet, and you'll have an account provisioned fairly quickly, and Alex and the rest of his team, etc., usually involved in that process of provisioning those accounts. And thereafter, you're able to come in through the Microsoft login and put in your CSU credentials to access your Padlet account. Once you're in Padlet, you can make as many boards as you like, and we'll go through that process now. You can see obviously I've got access to many of them in here. These are just the ones that I've been looking at more recently, but we might start by making a whole brand new Padlet. It asks us to choose a format. Again, the more common ones are listed up the top, but you'll note that some of those sandbox options are provided underneath. It's a very busy space in here. They want to give you a whole bunch of templates and things to choose from if you're looking for ideas, but I'm going to start just by making a standard Padlet wall. As soon as you've clicked that button, this wall is now live, which means at that point you can take that URL and share it with an audience, even while you're building and defining what it is and what it looks like. I did say wall. We'll give it a title. Amazing title right here. We hit done. And now we can start customizing. But you'll see that anyone coming to this page is able to hit the post button down in the corner and start adding content to the board. You've got a lot more customization options happening up here underneath the settings cog in the corner. And you'll see via the tabs that are up there that you can start changing how it appears, how it's engaged with by the audience, the type of layouts you're using, and you can get as creative in this space as you want to. I'll go one of those. There's a background. Do I want some icons next to the heading? Sure, why not? Etc, etc. If you want a subheading underneath, you might put some instructions in here for how to use the board. And you'll see that all of that is updating live. And then there's a bunch of other further customization options that you can go through. I'm not going to go through all of those today. This is definitely a space where you want to get in here and have a play yourself. Keep in mind that by default, the newest posts on a Padlet board will be pushed to the top left. That's its default option. And as more and more of those posts are added, it will just keep shunting them to the top left. Things like commenting for your audience is on by default. That can be turned off. You also need to really get into questions around how you want the audience to engage in this space. So you might be looking at your share settings, which are up here in the top right, and deciding that those that are coming into this space, what can they do? At the moment, visitors, or anonymous users if you want, have the ability to make posts, so they're writers, but you can also change that if you want this board to be used passively. So you're providing information, but you don't want them to be able to change any of it. You could make them readers. Maybe you only want them to be able to comment on the things that are already there. Maybe you have colleagues, etc., that you also want to be able to edit the Padlet board at different points in time. Well, you could change visitors to either moderators, or more commonly, we would add in a collaborator. So I might turn around and say, now I feel like there she is, M, just an M. And there's Michelle, and I can add her in as either a collaborator and a person with admin access that's also able to clear the board. Keep in mind that Charles Sturt University members, now Alex, you can chime in here if you like, this option has not worked reliably as far as I'm aware for quite some time. Now, it may very well be that that's changed more recently since we all moved to operating inside the Padlet.com space. But once upon a time, that kind of group account access setting seemed to be quite buggy. So I guess just be careful using that. Usually with student use, we're looking at this option of people that come to the link and what level of access they have. Now, Michelle mentioned on her boards, for example, in terms of securing them, that she had turned on a password to access the board. Now, particularly in that context of using boards relating to assessment, this is a very good idea. Essentially, it would be the bare minimum that I would suggest these days if you're getting students to put assessment information in here or other sort of personal information. Get them to use a password to log into the board. You provide that information through the subject site, and that means that the publicly available board through that URL cannot be opened by people without that password. So we lock that down. That's it. Also, the marking, as Michelle's mentioned there in the chat, that's happening through an assignment portal as opposed, or a gradebook column, as opposed to anything relating to those marks happening inside the Padlet board itself. So it becomes the creation space, the collaboration space, the repository for the different types of media, etc., that are being created. But the actual feedback on the assessment and the grade for the assessment are happening through our secure assessment areas. And that's a position that essentially has iterated over time. All right. In terms of what types of content we can add to Padlet, I'm assuming that a lot of the people in this meeting have used Padlet before, if not all of you. But just a quick reminder, because this tool is updated with more functionality added all the time. Once we hit post, apart from the ability to add text into the post, it is that multimodality that I mentioned before that really makes this tool stand out. And if I click on this All Tools option in here, you can get a taste for all the different types of content that participants in the board can add. So if that means taking photos or using your webcam to add video recordings into your Padlet post, or getting students to record themselves speaking into a Padlet post, a screencast can be made on the spot into this tool, embedded into the post. You can have different types of interactivity built in, like polls, for example, link to YouTube clips, images. There is a whole bunch of functionality. If you have a YouTube clip link, etc., all of that can be embedded into a Padlet post, and that is just added instantly without the need for other software to be installed. So again, is that ease of access which really makes Padlet stand out. Let me stop there for a moment. We've been going kind of flat chat for half an hour so far, focusing mainly on Padlet and some of the uses that people use. I'm interested in what I guess the audience has to say about this, or any questions that you might have around the use of Padlet. Would anyone like to come off mute and weigh into that space a little bit? No?
Lachlan, I was
Alex?
just
Yep.
typing up. You can also limit the types of post fields if you want to restrict it to a certain types of answers. So maybe you want a specific spot where they answer where they put their student number, and then you need them to put a video in, so you can make a field that is just video, and then you can have another space for text. That's under the settings and appearance, and then down in the post area. So you can have, very specific types if you need that for some reason. I have seen it used before down in post fields.
There you go. So actually specifying the type of fields and adding custom fields in, for example, on the posts, which allows, as Alex said, you to define the type of post content, where it's happening, the order, etc., that it happens on the board. So you can actually customize those additionally, and add in other interactive fields like sort of radio buttons and things as well. So they keep adding more and more functionality to this tool. And I guess while I'm talking about that, I'll also give a plug for another format of Padlet posts that you may not have seen yet, which is the table format. Now, I'm not sure if you've seen the table format yet and how to play around with it, but given that Trudy and this particular subject used the table format prolifically, let me open up one of these. So this was used for a visual arts education subject. And this is the table format, where you'll see that the posts that get added go across the page with the fields being defined and separated like this. So the poster, the subject, the attachment that the student has added, and you can see in the first instance these are graphics that the students have uploaded. They've then been asked to provide a description around it or a text response, and then you get commentary and reactions. And you could further define that by adding more of those custom fields that Alex has just mentioned, if you want the students to add different types of contributions into this format. So that means that someone, pardon me, engaging with that can then open up those individual contributions, and here you can see the students weighing in with their feedback. And then in terms of adding to that, it also allowed students to add in audio and video as a part of their contributions. So some of them were adding music for the activity, creating music, sharing that with their peers. Others were choosing artwork and things like that. So the modality around it. V, you're up.
Thanks, Lachlan. Do you have you seen any issues with using them as embedded in the content in Brightspace, particularly when you've got these, I guess, more heavier boards that have got audio and things like that in there? Is there any bugginess issues about that?
No, only in terms of the amount of real estate required to engage with it effectively. So when we have an entire web page on a widescreen monitor like we're looking at the moment, then no problem at all. We go, great, there's enough space to do that. If I look at a board that's embedded within a subject site, and we might go back to looking at, right, so here's a perfect example. I'm logged in as a staff member at the moment looking at this content in midwifery on this Padlet board that's in here, and they've only used, is there 2 columns? There's 3 columns, right? So you can see that the real estate in this view as a staff member is a little bit compromised when we're looking at it embedded. So if we switch to the student view and see if that improves at all, and go, right, content, topic, module, where is it hiding? Topic 1. Oh, hello, Brightspace. Oh, here we go. It is going to load. Right, so here's a Padlet board. I think that looks pretty good. Don't see any issues with it. The interactivity works fine. And at a pinch, if there is more content required or the student wants it, then we just go full screen and it gets as much real estate as it needs. But that's really the only concern I've ever seen raised with embedding Padlet within Brightspace, is how busy the board is, how much content is in there, how much scrolling is required. So if there's scrolling within scrolling, etc., things like that. But those are, I mean, it's a good question. The functionality is not compromised in any way, but it's just the user experience in terms of that busyness. Absolutely. Alex says, embedding Panopto videos into Padlet generally does not work. Right, and that's because of the Panopto sharing settings. Padlet will take a link, and if it's public and doesn't require any level of authentication or logging in, then it'll play. But if it sits behind a layer of sort of authentication and other things as well, or that the video settings for the Panopto vid aren't set to just anybody, unlike Panopto videos inside Brightspace directly, which will do that handshake between student is a user, is a CSU person, it'll play. Inside a Padlet board, it's gone out to a public website, so it doesn't have any of that other information about who the person viewing it is. So there may be, it's not really bugginess, it's working as it should, it's just that we haven't necessarily looked at the sharing settings across both platforms. It's a really good point. All right, Michelle, I can see your hand up, sorry about that.
I was just going to say, like, in terms of the bugginess, when I've got the 2 Padlet boards, and they usually end up having about 35 presentations on the board, and they're all videos with like different audio visual components to it. I haven't ever had any issue with that. The only issue I came across were those last minute ones that the day of the assessment task at 5 o'clock, you know, the due date, they've said, oh, my file isn't, it's too big to save, but that's a different issue. But in terms of uploading it, and it isn't buggy on the Padlet at all. I haven't found that anyway.
Thank you. And I think as well, I know in terms of the different formats available, etc., for using audio and video when you're uploading to the board, I won't make the post here, but you can see that when you go to upload here, and it allows students to choose from a huge variety of formats. In terms of the video and audio formats that it'll accept, It's not quite as powerful as Panopto in terms of every format, video format and audio format available, but it covers all the main bases that students are likely to create that content as. So I haven't really seen any complaints in that sense. All right, we might stop there in terms of talking about Padlet and move on to another tool, given that we've managed to kill about 3/4 of our time here this morning. But that's as it should be, because I think far and away it's one of the most commonly used collaborative engagement tools that we have going here. All right, let's move on, and we will talk a little bit about Zoom whiteboards. Let's do that. I'm not sure if you've used Zoom whiteboards yet. I'm going to assume that you haven't, just for the sake of what I'm talking about here. If you open the Zoom desktop application, so let me move this off the screen. If you're on a CSU device, you should have a Zoom icon available to you. If you can't see it or you're on a personal device, just type in Zoom and you'll see the Zoom Workplace app appear. Open that up and it gives us this little box of doodads. The Zoom Workplace Hub. So we're not in a live Zoom meeting yet, but we can create artifacts that we can then use later in our Zoom meetings from this space. And this is usually a fairly proactive way to approach the use of Zoom. I know a lot of people will launch a Zoom meeting and then try and do things on the fly. That's fine. No shade there, but in terms of actually preparing things in advance that you can then draw into any future Zoom meetings, this is a great way to do it. Open the Zoom Workplace app, make sure that you are signed in as your CSU self. Top right hand corner, you'll see a little profile icon, and make sure that it's referring to @csu.edu.au so that you are definitely signed in with your CSU account. For those of you that have your own Zoom accounts and other things, I'm pretty sure it may not give you all of the functionality or privileges that we get access to under our CSU Enterprise account. As always, make sure that you check for updates whilst clicking on your profile icon, because Zoom is prolific in terms of its update schedule. There's a new update in Zoom, it feels like just about every second week. So you might as well check that. Installing it will take about 30 seconds. I'm not going to do it now, but do it when you have a moment. But in the Zoom Workplace Hub on the left-hand side, you should see a tab that says Whiteboards towards the top left. If you can't see it, then you'll be able to click on More down the bottom, and then you'll find it in there. It may mean that you haven't opened it before, and that's why it might not be in your taskbar here, but I'm going to open Whiteboards on the left. And this will allow me to see all of the whiteboards that I've ever created, but also to create new whiteboards on the fly. So that's what I'm going to do right here, right now. Let's create a new whiteboard. So we have a whiteboarding tool. I don't need the getting started information, thanks. It's going to give you a bunch of prompts around, do you want to use these particular templates? Do you want to go through a tour? Have you got any questions? I'm okay. I'm really okay. Let's just go with blank canvas space. The great thing about this tool, like Padlet, as soon as I've clicked on that button, this board is now live. It exists out there, and I don't even need a Zoom meeting to start using it. So if I went up to the share area in the top right-hand corner, it's going to say that anyone that has this link can view. I'm going to change that to can edit this whiteboard, grab the link, and then share it with a bunch of people. So we now have a live whiteboard tool that we can use wherever we want to use it. I don't even need Zoom meetings to use this tool. So there's a big plus in comparison to a bunch of other whiteboard tools that you may be familiar with that require you to have logged into a separate platform somewhere and created an account and before you can start accessing and collaborating in the space. So it's already winning as far as I'm concerned. Now, we might then turn around and look at providing a little bit of structure in our whiteboard space. And I can see a few people in here already interacting in this live space. So let's give this board a little bit of structure. What am I going to do? Well, I might put some text in here and say, up here we'll go, breakfast. And let's make that a little bit bigger and go one of those, another one here, and go lunch. I think you get the idea of where I'm going with this. Maybe I want you to do this within kind of a defined sort of space. Let's separate this and put in a line here just to separate what you're doing. And then if I tell you, oh, there's a sticky note feature that's down here on the left. So if you click on a sticky note and go, hello, what did I do in here? There was toast happening. And you can see that we have instantly a way to do sticky note, whiteboarding, collaborative activities in that space, and people have already started engaging in there. Minimal instruction required, instantly accessible, and we could be doing this live, or I could be sending that link to someone to contribute to over time. So we now have a synchronous and asynchronous tool for whiteboarding that we can do whatever we want with, provision it wherever you want. So this is excellent because most whiteboarding tools have kind of levels of complexity in terms of providing access to the when, the how, the accounts, the access, whether you're using it inside another tool like the Teams whiteboard, for example, Miro accounts I spoke on before, but you can see that in terms of accessibility, this is pretty easy. Beyond that, we can do a bunch of other things inside the Zoom whiteboarding tool. Our content isn't just limited to text and other content. If you've got an image from somewhere else, like if I was to do something like use my snippy tool over here and say, oh, did that, and then went, bam, there's Veronica on the whiteboard, and I've added an image straight into that space to make this hugely more engaging in some way. So you can add media content into this space easily. If we hit our three dots underneath, you can see that there's a whole bunch of other things that we can do in that space as well. Do we want to add charts in here? Do we want to add a web page that has been embedded and getting an embed code onto our whiteboard? We can do that. Do we want to follow particular types of activity formats like a mind map or add in kind of other types of diagrams and flowcharts? We can do that. What else is in here? Scroll down, you'll see that we can add in different types of media content. It'll take videos as well. It's quite comprehensive in terms of its functionality for a tool that is really accessible. Hyperlinks and things, you can link out to things like SharePoint docs, Google Drive docs. So you can see I'm a big fan of the Zoom whiteboarding tool. I'm not going to go into all of that extended functionality today. We don't have the time, and I think it's far better experienced with yourself and some others if you want to do that. But I will point out a couple of other features. Firstly, we're on one whiteboard at the moment. If I want this to become a progressive activity, you'll notice up the top, it talks about pages. So what I can do at that point is I can in fact add another page or another whiteboard underneath, and that will allow participants to then move through multiple whiteboards. So that means that users in the first space can then go, and you'll find an arrow that will allow you to progress through to the second whiteboard or the third whiteboard or the fourth whiteboard. So you can have as many of those as you like if the activity requires that kind of iteration. What else can we do with this? It's great. We've given people a link. They can go to the whiteboard in full. However, we also have the ability, if we look under Share, to get an embed code. And this is basically magic at that point. So we can take our whiteboards and say, give me this embed code, and go back to somewhere like a subject site. If we turned, I won't pick on someone else's website. That would just be rude. Let's go with, that'll do. Content. You're not a student. Not a student. Let's go. So I will take a new page, and on that page I'm going to switch across to my source code view, or you could use the insert stuff option. Either or. Down the bottom we have the option to use the embed code, paste, next, insert, and finish. Oh, it's doing some kind of bot check. Oh no, what will I do? HJV6. I can do it. Brilliant. And there is my whiteboard, interactive, embedded within my content page for students to use at the same time. And I can see there that Alex and others in that space have the ability to add to the board without even going to another website. So this is kind of gold from my point of view, in that firstly, I don't have to be in a Zoom meeting to use this if I don't want to be. I can send people to the full board to use. I can just make it passive if I only want them to be looking at it without contributing, so you can lock it down, etc. But I can also then add it to be part of the actual learning experience, the learning activities, etc. in a subject site. Fantastic. What else can I do at that point if we were to launch a Zoom meeting itself? So let's go back to Zoom, open up a Zoom meeting. Where are you? Yes, I'm using the video in Teams. Don't worry about that. All right, so I'm inside a Zoom meeting. If I now go down to More, there is a whiteboard option amongst the toolset inside my live Zoom meeting. It is an existing whiteboard. So this thing that I've put time into, carefully building it, etc., I now want to bring it into this meeting and say, oh, that one, I want to use it for collaborating. Open the board. And now the participants in the Zoom meeting can engage with the board live as well. So they're instantly able to start just clicking on the whiteboard itself and adding content to it. So there's 3 ways that we've just managed to access a whiteboarding tool in the same space. So this is pretty much the winner for me in terms of accessibility. Readily available to users, regardless of if they're there on the spot, in the live Zoom meeting, in the subject site, or just given a link at any particular point in time. It just wins. So as you can see, I'm a big fan of Zoom whiteboards. All right, I'll kill the Zoom meeting. Hopefully that's the Zoom meeting. Yep. All right. We are almost at time, so I'm going to give a little plug for Zoom Docs, which is no longer called Zoom Docs, as Alex and I have discovered this morning as part of a recent update. It's now called Zoom Canvas or Canvas Docs. So I can see down here that there is an option for Canvas in my Zoom desktop application, the hub there. If you can't see it there, you'll be able to find it under the More option. But let's hit Canvas and see what's happening. So Canvas is under the Zoom desktop app, now refers to several tools that allow you to collaborate. I'm going to concentrate on the Documents tool. If I click on New Document, what we're dealing with at this point is effectively a wiki or a collaborative Word document that users in a Zoom meeting and CSU account holders will be able to contribute to. So it's going to lose marks at this point because it currently is not able to be shared with just anybody with the link to the tool. It requires that those users are CSU Zoom account holders. So they have to have logged into Zoom to be able to contribute to the document. So as I said, it's losing points. That's not currently turned on, allowing them just to add to the content in true wiki fashion. But as you can see here, anyone with the link, that's currently grayed out. So anyway, leave that with us. I think we'll probably work on that in the background to see if we can get that turned on. But by default, it's the people that are in a Zoom meeting that get access to be able to add to the document. However, what else can it do? So it's a document tool. You can see it's got a bunch of your standard kind of formatting options, allowing people to add content in here or to paste it from a Word doc or elsewhere. It allows you to add other documents embedded within that. You can sort of import things like Word docs, etc. in here. You can embed content into the tool. It also allows you to add in certain things like adding in checklists. You can also build in sub-pages underneath the document itself. Yeah, I mean, I'd go through and have a play with the types of media, etc., that you can embed. But if you keep in your mind that idea of a wiki, that's effectively what this is, that you open up in Zoom meetings and that you share with people after the fact. So when we talk about that, in terms of sharing the live document, we've said that it's limited in terms of only being able to be accessible to people with a Zoom account. So they have to log into Zoom, which all of our students can do with their CSU credentials. So it's not that they can't get access to it, it's just that it's behind a layer of logging in, etc. We also have the ability to export these documents. And if I can find the export option, you'll see that it will allow you to take those documents and export them either as Word and PDF, for example, once you're done with them. So there's that creation together and then export after the fact option. And those documents can be opened from inside the live Zoom meetings in the same way that the whiteboard was. So again, put time into it beforehand, preparing the thing, and then when you're in your live Zoom meeting, you open up the documents that you've pre-prepared for people to collaborate into that space. So it's a plug for the tool. I like it in terms of potential, but that limitation on the sharing in terms of it's not just click on the link and then go crazy, it loses marks in my book. All right, I can see we are almost at time. So if I bring us back to the Padlet board for today, you'll note towards the end, I have talked in a little bit more detail around Zoom Docs. There's a quick guide for using Padlet if you're after some information on how to create with more detail. And I've also linked to the Padlet support channel, which has really thousands of videos on how other people are using Padlets in different ways. So that's me giving a little bit of a shout out to that wider educator community that use Padlet a lot more than I do necessarily. But with that, I'll probably draw things to a close today. I'll stop the recording in a moment, but I am happy to hang around, answer any questions, talk about any of these tools or other things at length following this. But it would be rude of me not to thank Michelle for sharing her use of Padlet today, and also Alex for providing support in the chat, etc., around a tool that he's involved in facilitating a lot of the time as well. So thank you all. Yes, I will definitely put the Padlet into the chat again. Happy to do that, Leanne. And with that, I'll stop the recording.